In the village of Starahuta, in the Zhytomyr region of northern Ukraine, there was an oak tree at the edge of the eastern field that no one had touched for as long as anyone could remember. Not because of any official protection, no law, no landowner's decree, simply because of an understanding, passed from generation to generation without formal explanation, that this particular tree was not to be touched, not to be cut, not to be climbed, not even to be leaned against for rest during field work. In 1929, during the early collectivization period, a brigade of workers was sent from the district center to clear the field boundaries for the new collective farm. The local men refused to touch the oak. The brigade leader, a young man from Kyiv, who had never heard of Starahuta, and had no patience for village superstition, ordered it cut himself and took the axe to it personally. He struck it 3 times. On the third strike, something happened that the witnesses described differently but consistently. The young man dropped the axe. He stepped back. He looked at the tree for a moment with an expression no one could name. Then he walked away and did not stop walking until he reached the road to the district center. He never came back. The tree was not cut. The field boundary was drawn around it. The collective farm worked the field for 20 years with the oak standing in the corner, untouched, unacknowledged officially, quietly left alone by everyone who worked near it. The local men who had refused to cut it were never asked again. The brigade leader's expression, the one no one could name, was described by the witnesses who remembered it as the expression of someone who had looked at something and understood in a single moment exactly what it was, and exactly what it could do, and exactly how much they did not want it to do it to them. The Lisovik is one of the least discussed spirits in the Slavic tradition. Less famous than the Leshy, less dramatic than the Rusalka, less immediately threatening than the Banner. But in the villages, where the old knowledge survived longer, it was considered among the most important spirits to understand and the most dangerous to offend. Because unlike the Leshy, who governed all forests generally, the Lisovik governed one specific tree, and that specificity made it more personal, more present, and more impossible to avoid. Every old tree had one, not young trees, not saplings or trees of ordinary age, old trees. Trees that had been growing for longer than human memory reached. Trees that had stood through events the village still talked about, and events the village had forgotten. Trees that had become landmarks, reference points, the fixed coordinates around which generations of human activity had oriented itself. These trees had accumulated something over their centuries of standing. A presence, a particular density of existence that younger things did not possess. The Lisovik was that presence, given will, not given form exactly. It rarely appeared in any describable shape. It was experienced rather than seen, a quality of attention emanating from the tree, a sense of being observed by something that had been observing this specific patch of ground since before your grandparents' grandparents were born, a heaviness in the air near the tree that was not temperature, and not wind, and not anything that could be measured with instruments. When it did appear visibly, in the accounts that describe direct encounters, it appeared as something glimpsed in or through the tree, rather than beside it, a face in the bark. Not carved, not an accident of texture, but genuinely present eyes that tracked movement, an expression that changed, a shape within the canopy that was not branches, a darkness at the base of the trunk that was darker than shadow and that moved when nothing else moved. It did not leave the tree. This was the essential difference between the Lisovik and the Leshy. The Leshy walked, moved through the forest, pursued and disoriented and engaged with travelers. The Lisovik stayed. It was rooted as the tree was rooted, not physically. It had no physical form to root. But in the same way, its existence was tied to that specific tree, that specific location, that specific accumulation of centuries. Move the tree and you destroyed the Lisovik. But you also, in destroying it, released something that had been contained. This was what the brigade leader had understood in the moment he stepped back from the oak. Not through any prior knowledge. He had no prior knowledge. He was from Kihu. He had come to clear field boundaries. But in the moment of the third axe strike, something had communicated itself to him with a directness that bypassed language and knowledge and rational framework entirely. He had understood what was in the tree and what would happen if he continued, and he had made a decision that his superiors in the district center would later describe as a mental breakdown, and that everyone in Huta would describe as the first intelligent thing he had done since arriving. In ethnographic records from the Potercha region collected in the 1890s, there are accounts of 41 trees identified by their villages as having a Lisovik presence. The trees ranged from oak to linden to ash to pine, but shared consistent characteristics. All were estimated to be at least 200 years old. All were solitary, or nearly solitary, rather than part of a dense forest. And all had some documented history of unusual events in their vicinity. The unusual events were not dramatic, not lightning strikes or supernatural apparitions or sudden deaths. Smaller things, accumulated over generations. Animals that refused to graze near the tree, regardless of how hungry they were. Birds that did not land in its branches. A consistent coolness in its shade that exceeded what the shade alone should have produced. The sense, reported by virtually everyone who had spent time near these trees, of being watched specifically and personally watched, not in the general way that forests watch, but in the way that an individual intelligence watches something it has decided to pay attention to. In 1903, a young woman named Darya Kovalenko from a village in the Kiju region climbed an old linden tree on her family's property. On a dare from her cousins. The tree was known in the family. Her grandmother had told her about it, had told her not to climb it, had not explained why with any specificity beyond. It is old, and it does not like to be disturbed. Darya was 16, and the dare was there, and she climbed it. She reached the first major branch, perhaps 4 meters up, and stopped. She said afterward that she stopped because she felt something change in the tree beneath her hands, not movement. The tree was completely still. A change in quality, in temperature, possibly, though she could not be certain. More accurately, she said, a change in attention, as if something that had been present but unfocused had suddenly focused on her. Specifically on her, on the specific fact of her hands on the bark, and her weight on the branch, and her presence in a space that was not hers to occupy. She climbed down immediately, not in panic. She was careful, deliberate, took her time because rushing would have been dangerous. But she climbed down without stopping, and when she reached the ground, she stepped back from the tree and stood there for a moment breathing. Her cousins asked what had happened. She said, nothing, but she never went near that tree again. And when she had children of her own, she told them what her grandmother had told her, with one addition from her own experience. It is old and it does not like to be disturbed, and if you disturb it you will know immediately, and you will not want to disturb it again. The relationship between a village and its Lisovik trees was, in the old tradition, one of the most carefully maintained relationships in the community. Not because the Lisovik was actively hostile. It was not, in its undisturbed state, hostile at all, but because the consequences of disturbing it were considered serious enough that the maintenance of the relationship was treated as a community responsibility rather than an individual one. The practices were simple. You did not cut the tree or damage it in any way. You did not build on or directly adjacent to it. You did not allow livestock to graze beneath it. Children were taught from early ages which trees in the area had a Lisovik presence, and were told clearly that these trees were not for climbing, not for playing near, not for using as landmarks in games. The knowledge of which trees these were was considered important enough to pass down with the same care as knowledge of which plants were poisonous and which water sources were safe. You could acknowledge it. This was not required. The Lisovik did not demand acknowledgement the way the Domovic did not express displeasure at being forgotten. It was simply old enough and self-sufficient enough not to need human recognition. But acknowledgement was considered respectful, and respect towards something that old and that present was considered its own reward. Passing the tree, you might nod, might say a word. Nothing specific, just a recognition. I see you. I know you are here. I am passing through your space, and I mean no disturbance. Some accounts described leaving offerings at the base. Small things, bread or salt or a handful of grain at harvest time, not to appease it, not because it wanted or needed these things, but as an expression of the relationship. We have been here together for a long time. We have both watched this ground change. Here is something from this year's work, offered in acknowledgement of the years of standing you have done in this place. The oak in Stara Huta was still standing in the 1980s. According to a letter written by a resident of the village to a folklore researcher in Kiev, collective farm had long since reorganized, and the field boundaries had been redrawn multiple times, but the oak remained in its corner, untouched, worked around. The letter writer said that the younger workers on the farm did not know the story of the brigade leader, and did not know specifically why the tree was left alone. They simply left it alone. The way you leave alone something that has always been left alone. The weight of accumulated precedents substituting for the specific knowledge that had originally created it. The letter writer said he visited the tree every year on his birthday. He had been born within sight of it, and felt some connection to it that he could not fully articulate. He said that standing near it, he always had the same sensation. Not fear, not awe. Not exactly. Something more like the feeling of standing in the presence of someone very old who has seen everything and judges nothing and simply continues, year after year, doing the slow, ancient work of being exactly what they are, in exactly the place they have always been. He said, I do not know if it is aware of me. I suspect it is. I suspect it has been aware of every person who has stood near it for the last 400 years. Aware in whatever way. Something that old and that rooted is aware of the brief-form things that pass through its vicinity and then are gone. I find this comforting rather than frightening. We pass. It remains. It remains. There is something steadying about the presence of something that will still be here long after. Everything I know has changed beyond recognition. Find your old trees. Learn which ones have been standing since before memory reaches. Stand near them quietly and see if you feel what everyone who has ever stood near them has felt, that particular quality of being noticed. Something ancient and patient and completely indifferent to the speed at which human lives move. It will not harm you if you are respectful. It has seen too much to be bothered by the merely living. Just do not take an axe to it. Some understandings do not require words, and some things, once understood,